There was an evening not long ago when I sat down on the couch after a long day and I realized something strange. I wasn't tired in my body, I was just carrying too much in my mind. And in that quiet moment, a question found me that I hadn't asked myself in years. Not really. What actually makes a life good? Not a successful life, not a busy life, a good one. We rarely stop long enough to ask that. We're too busy answering messages, getting through the list, keeping up with everything that never seems to end. And then, on some ordinary evening like that one, the question just shows up. Hi, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Slow Down with Brenda, a place where we're not trying to move faster through life, we're just trying to understand ourselves a little better, one conversation at a time. There's a study I came across not long after that evening, and it stopped me in my tracks. It's the longest study ever done on human happiness, 86 years, starting in 1938 at Harvard, following hundreds of people from their 20s all the way to the end of their lives. Not a survey people filled out once and forgot about, an entire life recorded year after year. And the question the researchers kept asking was simple. What actually makes someone live longer, stay healthier, feel happier? We'd probably guess money, or career success, or some perfect diet. That's what we're told over and over by almost everything around us. But that's not what they found. When the researchers looked back at everyone at age 50, trying to predict who would be healthy and happy at 80, the answer wasn't in anyone's cholesterol levels. It was in something much closer to home, how happy people were in their relationships. We could read that line quickly and move on, but if we sit with it for a second, it's worth noticing. It's not about how many people you know. It's not even about whether you're married. It's about whether you feel genuinely connected to the people around you. Maybe we've all felt the opposite of that at some point, standing in a room full of people and still feeling empty, having a life that looks fine from the outside, while something underneath feels harder to name. If that's familiar to you, I don't think it means something is wrong with you. Maybe it's just a signal. And we're going to spend some time together figuring out what that signal is actually trying to say. What surprised the researchers even more wasn't just that relationships make us happier, that part we could probably guess. What surprised them was that good relationships also make our bodies healthier, not just our mood, our biology. We tend to think of the heart and the body as two separate things. One handles feelings, the other handles health. But this study suggests they're far more connected than we realize. When something stressful happens, a hard conversation, a message that makes our stomach drop, our body reacts almost instantly. Heart rate climbs, breathing quickens. That's the fight or flight response, something we've carried for thousands of years to keep us safe. The reaction itself isn't the problem. What matters is whether the body gets to come back down afterward. And here's what the researchers found. When we have someone to call, someone to talk to, someone to lean on, our body actually settles. But when we don't have that, the body tends to stay a little more on alert, day after day, year after year. And over time, that quietly wears on us, raising the risk of things like heart disease. Maybe you've heard the idea that loneliness isn't good for us, but this isn't just a saying. It's something our body is genuinely going through, quietly, in the background of an ordinary day. So if you're feeling lonely right now, maybe it's not because something is missing in you. Maybe it's simply a signal, the same way hunger or thirst is a signal. Your body is telling you it needs something. In this case, what it needs is connection. And once we understand that, we don't have to blame ourselves for feeling this way anymore. We can just start asking a gentler question. What's making connection hard for me right now? And is there one small thing I could do about it today? So if connection is something our body actually needs, the next question is worth sitting with for a moment. What kind of connection are we even talking about? Because it's easy to assume this means having a big circle of friends, a full calendar, constant company. But that's not quite it. Somewhere in that same research, the scientists asked something surprisingly simple. Who could you call in the middle of the night if you were scared or sick or just needed someone? Most people could name at least one person right away, but some people couldn't name anyone. And what stood out most was that a few of those people were married, sitting right next to someone every night and still not sure they'd be the one they'd call. We tend to think of loneliness as being alone, but maybe it's closer to this, not having that one person you're certain would show up. There's a name for this in the research: secure attachment. It goes back to something we all experienced as babies, long before we could put any of it into words. When someone showed up for us consistently enough, we learned something in our bodies before we ever learned it in our minds: that we're safe, that we're worth loving, that if something goes wrong, someone will come. And maybe you've seen this play out somewhere ordinary, like a playground. A toddler wanders off, gets a little too far, and then turns around and runs straight back to grab a parent's leg. Not because anything happened, just to check, to touch home base for a second, and then off they go again. We don't really outgrow that. We just stop noticing we're still doing it. Think about the last time you wanted to try something a little risky: a new job, a hard conversation, a decision that scared you a little. Chances are some part of you wanted to run it by someone first, not necessarily for advice, just to hear, "It's okay, and I'm here either way." That's what makes the risk feel possible. Maybe this is worth asking yourself gently, without any judgment attached. If something went wrong tonight, is there someone I'd call? And if the answer comes slowly or doesn't come at all, that's not a failure. It's just information. It tells us where to focus. There's something else in this research I keep coming back to: the idea that no one, not even the people who study calm for a living, gets to skip the hard days. The man behind this study is also a Zen teacher, someone people assume must have life figured out by now. And he says that's not true at all. Some mornings he still wakes up unsettled or unsure, the same as anyone. What he's learned isn't how to stop the hard moments from coming. It's something closer to what one of his teachers once told him. We can't stop the waves, but we can learn how to surf. Maybe that's a kinder way to think about the hard days. Not something to fix or outrun. Just something to move through, ideally with someone nearby who knows what it's like. So the question isn't really how many people are in your life, it's whether you have even one relationship where you don't have to perform, where being tired or scared or unsure is allowed. If you already have that person, maybe today is a good day to let them know what they mean to you. And if you're not sure you do, that's not something to fix overnight. It might just be the thing worth paying attention to next. There's something else this research uncovered that surprised me even more than the science of stress or attachment. It has to do with the tiny moments we usually don't think twice about. The ones we walk past every single day without realizing they're doing something for us. There was an experiment done on a commuter train in Chicago. Researchers split people into two groups. One group was told to do what they normally do on their commute: look at their phone, read, listen to music, keep to themselves. The other group was asked to do something that felt a little uncomfortable: talk to a stranger. Before it started, almost everyone in that second group assumed they wouldn't enjoy it. Talking to a stranger sounded awkward, maybe even a little draining. But by the end of the ride, something had shifted. The people who talked to a stranger were noticeably happier than the people who sat quietly, alone with their phones. Maybe that doesn't sound like much. A few minutes of small talk on a train. But maybe that's exactly the point. It doesn't take much. We tend to save our energy for the relationships that feel significant, the close friends, the family we love. And in doing that, we quietly overlook something: a small exchange with the person making our coffee, a nod to someone in an elevator, a word with a neighbor we've never really spoken to. We treat these as filler, nothing moments. But maybe they're not nothing at all. Think about the last time someone you didn't know well said something kind to you, unprompted. A stranger who smiled first. Someone who asked how your day was going and actually seemed to want to know. There's a small lift that comes with that. It doesn't last long, but it's real. And it turns out we can create that feeling for other people too, almost without trying. What makes this interesting is that it isn't really about being naturally outgoing. It's closer to a habit, something we get a little more comfortable with each time we do it, even if it feels strange at first. The first stranger you talk to might feel a little forced. By the fifth, it starts to feel like something you just do. And maybe you're listening to this thinking, that's not me. Maybe the idea of striking up conversations with strangers sounds exhausting rather than energizing. If that's you, this isn't a rule you have to follow. Some of us feel most connected in a long, quiet conversation with one close friend, not a handful of small ones with people we don't know. There's no version of this that's more correct than the other. The only real question is whether you're finding connection somewhere, in whatever shape fits who you are. What matters more than the form connection takes is simply noticing when it's missing. Maybe it's a quick text to someone you haven't spoken to in a while. Maybe it's letting a conversation with the person behind the counter last a few seconds longer than usual. Small as they are, these moments seem to remind us of something we forget too easily, that we're not moving through the day entirely on our own. Because most of the time, we're not looking for something big to change how we feel. We're just looking for a small reminder that someone else is there too. So if small, ordinary connections can shift how we feel, it's worth asking why we don't reach for them more often. And I think part of the answer has to do with what we've been taught to chase instead. Somewhere along the way, most of us picked up the idea that if we just had more money, a better title, a nicer car, we'd finally feel settled. And this research doesn't dismiss that entirely. It's actually more nuanced than that. When our basic needs aren't met, when we're genuinely worried about paying rent or affording groceries, that stress is real, and it takes a real toll on how we feel. There's no pretending otherwise. Financial stability matters, deeply, up to a point. But here's the part that surprised a lot of people, including the researchers themselves. Once those basic needs are covered, more money doesn't seem to add much more happiness. Someone making a very comfortable income isn't necessarily happier than someone making enough to live steadily and well. Money turns out to be less like a destination and more like a tool, something that can remove certain kinds of stress, not something that creates peace on its own. Maybe the harder part isn't understanding that. It's actually believing it, especially with everything around us suggesting the opposite. We open our phones and see someone's vacation, someone's new kitchen, someone's life that looks effortless from a few photos. And some quiet part of us starts comparing, almost without permission. There's an old line that captures this well: comparison is the thief of joy. It sounds almost too simple, but the research backs it up. People who compare themselves to others more often tend to feel less happy day to day. What's interesting is that not everything pulls us into comparison the same way. Scrolling through curated moments online tends to do it almost automatically. But something like gardening or a quiet walk outside rarely does. Maybe it's because those moments don't ask anything of us. They're not measured against anyone else's. They're just ours. Maybe the goal isn't to stop comparing altogether. That might be asking too much of ourselves. It might be more useful to simply notice where the comparison tends to creep in and spend a little less time there and a little more time somewhere that lets us just be. If you think about the moments in your own life that actually felt good, really think back, chances are they weren't about anything you bought. They were probably about somewhere you were or someone you were with. An afternoon that had nothing to prove. That might be worth remembering the next time something online quietly makes you feel like you're behind. You're probably not behind. You might just be looking at the wrong measuring stick. There's one more part of this research I want to share with you, and it's the part that stayed with me longest. Near the end of the study, researchers looked back at what people said when they reflected on their whole lives, what they regretted, and what they were proud of. The regrets weren't complicated. Two came up again and again. The first was time. People wished they hadn't spent so much of it working and so little of it with the people they loved. Not a dramatic realization, just something that had gradually built up, unnoticed, until they finally looked back. The second regret came up more often from women than men. They wished they'd spent less of their life worrying about what other people thought of them. All that energy, spent trying to be seen a certain way, when it turns out most of it never mattered as much as it felt like it did at the time. And what were people proudest of looking back? Not the promotions, not the achievements, even the big ones. What they named again and again was simpler than that. I was a good friend. I showed up for my kids. I was someone people could count on. Even the people who'd won real recognition in their fields didn't lead with that when they looked back. They led with who they'd been to the people around them. Maybe that says something about what actually lasts. I think about that evening on the couch again, the one where this all started for me. I wasn't having some big crisis. I was just worn out in a way that finally made me stop and ask what I'd been avoiding. Am I actually living a good life? Or am I just living a full one? Maybe you're somewhere similar right now listening to this. Maybe some part of this made you think of someone specific, a person you haven't really talked to in a while. Not because anything went wrong. Life just got busy, and busy has a way of slowly taking the place of things that matter more. Here's what I don't think this means. It doesn't mean you need to overhaul your entire life starting tomorrow. It doesn't mean quitting your job or becoming someone who talks to strangers on trains if that's never going to feel like you. That's not what any of this is asking. What it might mean is something much smaller. One text, one person. Something as simple as, "I was just thinking about you." Not because you need something from them, just because you were thinking of them, and they deserve to know that. Maybe it means setting up something small and regular with someone you care about, so it happens by default instead of by accident. A weekly call, a standing coffee, something that doesn't rely on finding time because the time is already set aside. Or maybe it's even smaller than that. Maybe it's just noticing the next small moment of connection that comes your way today and staying in it a few seconds longer than you normally would. None of this asks you to become a different person. It's not about adding more to an already full life. It's about noticing what's already right in front of you, closer than you realized. If there's one thing worth carrying with you after today, maybe it's this. A good life isn't something we arrive at someday, once everything finally lines up. It's something we build, in the ordinary moments we choose to actually be present for. The people we call back, the conversations we don't rush through, the small, unremarkable Tuesday evenings that, it turns out, were the whole point all along. You don't have to figure all of this out today. Just maybe, tonight, there's one person worth reaching out to. That's enough.